Hassan Nasrallah is finished, and when you hear about how it happened, it's going to blow your mind. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this delightful chap, he's the head of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a Lebanese, Shiite, Iranian-backed anti-Israel organization. And that organization operates in Lebanon, which is a huge pool of chaos. If you think that American politics is complicated and nasty, well, you ain't seen the Lebanese politics. It is 100 times worse. The religious tensions in Lebanon, including the Armenians, the Kurds, the Druze, the Sunnis, the Shiites, the Christians, they've been going on for decades. These guys have literally tried to kill each other for more than 40 years, and they haven't stopped since. Now, how does this have to do with Nasrallah being finished? And even to begin with, why does a Lebanese organization trying to wage war against the Israelis? What's going on here? Actually, up until 1970, the Israelis and the Lebanese had literally zero issues. They were both dealing with their own mess back home. The Lebanese had a chaotic system. The Israelis were just starting out. The country was almost 20 years old. And they had no intentions of meddling in each other's business. Enter the KGB. In 1964, the KGB decides to form the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, based on the same model they did in Bolivia and in Colombia. And the way they did it was quite simple. They got a guy from Egypt. His name was Yasser Arafat. They faked his credentials, created the whole idea of Palestinian organizations and Palestinian people, etc., etc. And they went ahead with it to destabilize the Israelis. And by that, to cause some damage and to slow down the Americans in the Middle East. So this was an anti-US play by the KGB. And the crazy part is, in their wildest dreams, I don't think there's any KGB operative that could have guessed that this is what the PLO is going to lead to 50 years later. But that's a story for a different video. So the KGB starts and it forms the PLO. The PLO goes and settles in the West Bank. Now, the West Bank used to be controlled by Jordan. So they were operating out of a Jordanian territory that was adjacent and shared the border with the Israelis. And that cozy arrangement only lasted for 3 years, because in 1967, the Israeli neighbors decided to wage war and attack the Israelis, which led to the Israelis conquering Sinai from the Egyptians and the West Bank from the Jordanians. The PLO had to move into Jordan. Now, the Jordanians didn't particularly like the PLO. They knew who they were dealing with. And that is why in 1970, just 3 years later, they kicked them out. And the PLO had to move to Lebanon. And it settled in Lebanon in 1970. Now, in the 5 years that they've spent in the Lebanese territories, they've managed to start a civil war in Lebanon, which is exactly what the Jordanians were fearing. And they've managed to start almost a quasi-war with the Israelis by bombing, by doing terror attacks through the northern border of Israel from Lebanon. So, they dragged the entire country of Lebanon into war with the Israelis because of the terror attack, which is exactly what the Jordanians were fearing and exactly what the Egyptians are now fearing by not taking any refugees from Gaza. Just a side note. So in 1982, after 12 years of this crap, the Israelis had enough. And they basically go into Lebanon to deal with the PLO because the Lebanese government is too weak, the Lebanese army is too weak, they can't handle these guys. So in 1982, the Israelis go into South Lebanon, and they have two goals. One, to eliminate the PLO. Number two, promote the Christians of Lebanon to take power and therefore have an ally up north, something the Israelis never had. So this was a very interesting experiment, and the Israelis also set up a whole new Lebanese army controlled by the Israelis called the South Lebanon Army. Now, the Iranians, which by that point were 3 years into their new revolution, since 1979, they kicked out the king, the Shah, and a new Iranian regime had to respond. And they formed their own proxy in Lebanon to counter the Americans and the Israelis who are making moves on Lebanese soil. And their organization is called Hezbollah. Hezbollah means party, Allah means God, the party of God. This was a creation of the Iranians, their first kind of experiment in the proxy world. And the idea was that this organization will kick out the Israelis out of Lebanon. That was the official creed of Hezbollah, although now we know that this was just an Iranian proxy, and this was just a way to kind of conquer the hearts of the Lebanese Shiites to support Hezbollah. And once the Israelis saw Hezbollah actually gaining power and strength, they've decided to take out their leader, Abbas al-Musawi. In 1992, the Israelis killed Abbas al-Musawi in a helicopter strike. Now, he was replaced by somebody who was unknown, who was gray, not charismatic, complete nobody. His name was Hassan Nasrallah. And in their wildest dreams, the Israelis never imagined that this gray, almost pencil pusher, Hassan Nasrallah, is going to be the next charismatic leader of Hezbollah. But that is exactly what happened. He became extremely popular, and he made Hezbollah stronger than ever. Politically, militarily, he becomes the shot caller in Lebanon de facto. And he pushes the Israelis out. In the year 2000, the Israelis had enough. They pull out of South Lebanon. Hassan Nasrallah becomes the leader, the savior of Lebanon. He has never been more popular. He's the huge winner who just pushed the Israelis out. He is now the new de facto king, ruler of Lebanon through his party Hezbollah. Now, in 2006, 6 years after the Israelis left Lebanon, the war still continues. And a lot of you may ask yourself, well, why did this war continue 6 years after the Israelis pulled out of Lebanon when the entire goal of Hezbollah was to push the Israelis out? And the answer is very simple. Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. Its job is to make the Israelis' life a living hell. And it's always going to find excuses to make that happen. Ever since the Israelis pulled out, Hezbollah found different excuses to attack the Israelis. A little piece of land called Shaba Farms, where the Israelis still had some military presence, were now the excuse of continuing the war against the Israelis. And in 2006, the Hezbollah actually abducts a few Israeli soldiers, it kills another few, and it starts a whole new war. The Israelis go ham on the Dahya quarter in Beirut, Lebanon, the capital of Beirut and the stronghold of Hezbollah. They absolutely demolish it, which became the Dahya quarter war doctrine. This war doctrine, this logic was very simple. Create a balance of terror, create a lot of mayhem, a lot of damage, show the opponent, show your rival that war isn't worth it, that the juice is not worth the squeeze, that the damage is going to be so unproportional, it's not worth it to go overboard. Keep the warfare at minimal. Show them to keep the boundaries. Number two, let that organization, Hezbollah, institutionalize. Let it become more civilian because it will have to deal with trash, sewage, schools, police, crime. And when it becomes institutional, it takes responsibility over this civilian operation. It has no interest to drag the civilian population back into a war again. And that's going to lead to a cold ceasefire that at least is going to hold up for a couple of years. Now, that logic, which completely failed with Hamas in Gaza, the same logic actually worked with Hezbollah. Since 2006, up until now, there were no major wars between Hezbollah and Israel. For those exact reasons, Hezbollah became a civilian organization with military, but its main operation is the civilian administration of Lebanon. Plus, the Iranians look at it and they're saying, look, Hezbollah is extremely powerful, a lot of missiles, they can cause a lot of damage to Israel. Israel does not want to screw with Hezbollah. So we can race to a nuke, and these guys, Hezbollah, with their hand on the trigger, they can scare Israelis, they can deter Israelis from doing anything against Iran. Now, that logic led to this kind of Mexican standoff. And this is also why Hezbollah never got involved in the war after October 7th. The October 7th attack happened, but Hezbollah never stepped foot in that mess. Now, that led to a huge loss of face for Hezbollah and specifically for Nasrallah. They were seen as traitors, as cowards, at least in the Sunni world, definitely in Gaza. In Gaza and the West Bank, according to recent polls, 70% of people said they have a negative opinion of Iran and Hezbollah. The Palestinian people, and for that matter the entire Sunni world, is viewing Hezbollah and Nasrallah as cowards and as traitors for not helping the Gaza war with their own military, because they have a lot of missiles, a lot of ability to inflict serious pain on Israel. But they choose to exchange rockets every day to keep it on the low. And that's why since October 7th, Nasrallah has been boxing on the back foot. It's been dealing with a lot of damage from a reputational perspective. Because you see, the United States has gotten a lot better at this whole chess game, at least since the October 7th attack happened. The Obama administration started a really nasty policy that really made Iran much bigger than it should have ever been. And now, the US is kind of fixing it slowly. I'm going to explain how. The October 7th attack happens, and that is a huge embarrassment for the US because its greatest ally, its enforcer in the region, got embarrassed by Hamas. Now, right now, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli military, is basically mopping up Hamas from the rest of Gaza. And despite that initial embarrassment, the way the IDF, the way the Israelis have handled themselves, and the way they've basically conquered Gaza, and they're now on mop-up duty, was extremely impressive. So that was fixed. Number two, the Houthi rebels, which was the long arm of the Iranians, blocked off Egypt, the Suez Canal, another US ally. Now, the US solved this with the US coalition. So that is now reopened. So that is gone. Now, Gaza is now on the brink of being taken by the IDF completely, as I mentioned earlier. And the Iranians failed to ignite the internal tensions inside Israel. Israel has tensions between the Israelis themselves. As far as should we go left, should we go right? They went almost to war with each other before the October 7th attacks, trying to decide about political reforms, about judicial reforms. That is now gone. And any tensions that may have been considered as far as the Arab Israelis and the Jewish Israelis never developed into a war or a revolt or any sort of violence. Not to mention the West Bank has been pretty quiet since then. They haven't joined the war. On the other side of it, we're looking at Iran. A lot of tensions in Iran are brewing up. We just had an internal bombing in Iran, which is a huge embarrassment. Iran is really good at causing mayhem elsewhere, running proxy wars. They view themselves as the king on the chessboard. They don't want to move. They'll move the other pawns. And to have a bombing in your backyard is a huge embarrassment. On top of it, the Israelis just took out Reza Moussawi, the Quds Force manager in Syria, at the heart of the Iranian compound inside Syria, which was another huge embarrassment. Not to mention that the Israelis also just took out El-Aruri. Saleh El-Aruri was the point. He was the contact between the Iranians and Hamas. He was taken out in Lebanon, in Beirut, in the Dahya quarter, which is the heart of Hezbollah. And Nasrallah, because he had no choice, said in the beginning of this war that if Israel takes out any Hamas members on Lebanese soil, the response is going to be harsh and every red line will be crossed and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So the Israelis called this bluff, with the American support, of course. They're like, okay, let's take out a big guy in Lebanon and see what you're going to do about it. And that put the Iranians in a little bit of a bind, because Nasrallah was already fighting on the back foot from a PR perspective. He was mocked and ridiculed in the Arab world, and he had to make that statement. Well, if you guys do anything in Lebanon, my God. So now he was pushed by the US, with the use of the Israelis, to make that response. The bluff was called. Now Iranians must respond in order not to lose the battle over who's the leader of the Arab world. They have a huge dominance battle between them and the Saudis. They don't want to lose face, so they have to respond. Now obviously the Iranians can't and won't respond directly. They don't want to go to war with the US nor the Israelis. They don't have the means to do that. So they have the Houthis, but the Houthis are pinned down right now, with the United States naval coalition basically stepping on their neck. So the only option they have is Hezbollah, to retaliate against Israel. And Hezbollah can do a lot of damage to Israel. They have a lot of missiles, thousands of missiles. They can do massive damage to Israel. But the problem that throwing Hezbollah into this war, into this battle, is not optimal for the Iranians. And that is the brilliance of the catch-22 move the United States and the Israelis just did to Iran. Think about it this way. You see, Lebanon is in a huge economic crisis. It's basically on the brink of economic collapse. A lot of it has to do with what happened in 2006. A lot of it has to do with what happened with the explosion that Hezbollah caused in the port in Beirut. But mostly it's based on bad management by Hezbollah of the Lebanese government and the Lebanese policies. And if Lebanon goes to another war with the Israelis, sure, the Israelis will get a lot of hurt. But the Lebanese economy will be destroyed. The Lebanese infrastructure will be destroyed. Lebanon as a country will cease to exist the way we know it today. And here's the kicker. Hezbollah is a parasite. It needs a host body to survive. If the host body dies, the parasite dies with it. So they can't afford to take Lebanon to war. Number two, the Iranians don't want to lose the deterrence versus the Israelis. Once Hezbollah pushes the trigger and they blow up half of Israel, but they get destroyed in the process by the US and by the Israelis, any deterrence that the Iranians have against the Israelis is gone. Which means that if the Iranian Revolutionary Guard pushes towards the nuke, the Israelis can and will probably attack. And there's nothing that scares them from doing it. Which means that realistically, Hezbollah doesn't have a way to respond here. But no response to all these embarrassments is a bad look for Iran and for Hezbollah, and mainly for Hassan Nasrallah, which will take the fall for this. And that is crazy because just in 2006, Nasrallah was on top of the world. He was the guy who drove the Israelis out of Lebanon. The aura of the 2006 victory is now gone because of that lack of response. And by the way, when I say lack of response, we now know what that response was. After Hezbollah said, oh my God, they've carried out an assassination on Lebanese soil, We're going to go ham. What they've done is launch a few missiles and destroy a radar of the Israelis in the north of Israel. It was so meager and so pathetic that Nasrallah had to put out an explanation because he was mocked and ridiculed again. And he had to put out an explanation saying, no, this was just the initial response. There's more responses coming. Like a video game developer that just pushed out a crappy version and the gamers are not happy. It's like, no, that's just the beta. That's just the beta. I got better stuff coming up. Which means that now the US is boxing in the center of the ring and Hezbollah and mainly Nasrallah is in the corner and there's no way out. It's out of gas, it's out of punches, it's out of swords. You see, the IDF is now going to get to finish Gaza with no interference from Hezbollah. And now, the decision is all in the hands of the United States, which leaves Nasrallah with no good options. Once the IDF finishes Gaza, they'll move on to the north. After what happened on October 7th, the Israelis have seen the preview. They've seen the promo. They don't want to watch the same movie in the north of Israel. They're not going to accept Hezbollah sitting on the border waiting for another October 7th in the north of Israel. They're going to want to drive Hezbollah out of there. And there's two ways to do it. The US is going to say to the Lebanese, look guys, there's two options here. Number one, you go voluntarily and you move up north a lot. Or we're going to go in there and clean house. Whatever option, you choose. Now, if Nasrallah says, no, I'm moving north, no problem, he is dead politically. Because for him to take another embarrassment like that, after the string of embarrassment Iran has put him through, it's going to be the end of his political career. He will lose face. He will lose any sort of cachet he has in Lebanon. But if he goes to war with the Israelis, yes, he will inflict a lot of pain, but he will get wiped out along with the entire Lebanese infrastructure and economy. So as you can see, Nasrallah is finished. He has no way out of this politically. He either goes on the shield or he gets laughed out of town. He is finished. The war continues. I'll see you in the next video. And by the way, these videos, as you know, are not monetized fully because of the topics we're covering here. I say it again, for those of you who support us on Patreon, thank you so much. Your support keeps this going. I just want to say a huge thanks for every single one of you. And of course, if you haven't joined yet and you would like to support this channel, go to patreon.com/TomNashReport. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. Every support is appreciated. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one.